The gates of Cameron Barracks opened before dawn, and with them a wave of anxiety swept through the Highlands. Coaches carrying hundreds of migrant men, most of them young, alone, and recently arrived through the overstretched asylum system, rolled into a military installation that was never designed for a crisis of this scale. Inside the neighbouring homes, British Army families pulled their curtains back and watched in silence. Their husbands, fathers and partners are set for overseas deployment early this year, leaving behind women and children living just metres from an encampment of nearly 300 unfamiliar men. But the latest figures reveal an even more alarming reality. Inverness is just one node in a nationwide expansion.
803 migrants crossed the English Channel yesterday. That's the highest single-day crossing since October.
Across the UK, military sites from East Sussex to the Northern Highlands are now being prepared for up to 800 asylum-seeking men, a scale far beyond what local families were told when the first coaches arrived. What seemed like an isolated emergency is in truth part of a much larger operation unfolding quietly across Britain. And now, Britain is asking the same question. How did we get here?
For weeks, whispers had circulated in Inverness. Families spoke of phone calls from counsellors, hastily arranged meetings, warnings that a temporary accommodation solution might be placed on their doorstep. But few expected the scale, few expected the speed, and fewer still expected a government that repeatedly promised to restore border control, to move hundreds of asylum-seeking men into an active military zone, without the full backing of the community that must live with the consequences. Walking along the boundary fence today, the mood was unmistakable, tense, apprehensive, and edged with a sense of betrayal. These are not residents opposed to compassion. They are families who have endured years of deployments, sacrifices and separations, people who, perhaps more than most, understand what it means to serve their country, yet they now face daily life in the shadow of a policy that has brought the national migration crisis to their doorstep. And the timing could not be more politically explosive.
Across the UK, frustration over immigration has surged. The year 2025 closed with a deeply unsettling figure, over 41,000 small boat arrivals, the second highest total on record, despite repeated government promises to stop the boats. While Prime Minister Keir Starmer entered office vowing to restore order, his administration has struggled to contain a system collapsing under sheer volume. The Home Office, now led by Shabana Mahmood, is attempting a hard pivot. Temporary asylum status, longer pathways to residency, stricter assessments, and new return agreements with countries such as Angola and Namibia. But these measures, critics argue, are months, if not years, away from showing results. And in the meantime, the country must house more than 100,000 asylum seekers. What about our safety? One mother asked today, gripping her child's school bag. Why here? Why next to families whose partners are deployed? Why choose us? It is a question travelling far beyond Scotland. Communities across England and Wales have seen hotels converted, hostels repurposed, and council buildings transformed, often with minimal warning.
Every time a new site opens, the same arguments erupt. Concerns over policing, concerns over crime, concerns over cultural tensions, especially after high-profile cases involving asylum seekers sparked national outrage last year. Concerns that the UK's asylum system is no longer merely overwhelmed, but fundamentally broken. Inside the barracks, security patrols have been stepped up. Officials insist the men have undergone safety checks, but residents point to Home Office data showing tens of thousands of undocumented individuals remain untracked, and that more than 40,000 subjects of national security interest sit on intelligence watch lists. The fear, they say, is not rooted in prejudice, but in the government's repeated failure to demonstrate control. The political stakes are immense. Polling shows immigration is now the #1 issue for British voters, eclipsing the economy, NHS waiting lists and housing. Reform UK has capitalised on this sentiment, drawing support away from both Labour and the Conservatives. Within Labour, senior strategists warn the government faces an erosion of trust unless it can show concrete progress, not slogans, not promises, but visible, measurable action.
What happened in Inverness is now part of a wider pattern.
a country improvising, relocating, redistributing and relocating again, because no single part of the system is working properly. Local councils say they are overwhelmed, charities are stretched thin, the Home Office is drowning in backlogs, and residents feel they were never asked, only instructed. But the issue goes deeper still. For years, Britain has debated the cultural and security implications of large-scale migration. Some commentators argue that concerns are being weaponized for political gain. Others point to grooming gang scandals that authorities once avoided discussing and claim that officials are still too reluctant to confront hard questions about integration, cultural clashes and safeguarding. In today's debate, these tensions exploded once more. One side warned against painting all migrants as dangerous. Another insisted that acknowledging crime trends is not racism but realism. The divide is no longer left versus right. It is between those who believe Britain must treat individuals as individuals and those who believe cultural risk cannot be ignored. Both arguments now collide in the quiet streets surrounding Cameron Barracks.
Inside Parliament, the Home Office issued a statement claiming asylum hotels will be closed and that new, more suitable sites are being developed to ease pressure on communities. But families at the barracks say this reassures no one. They have heard similar promises for years, first from Conservatives, now from Labour. The government has managed to restore the confidence of the public, a public increasingly convinced that Britain's borders are no longer controlled by those elected to run them. Tonight, Inverness becomes a symbol, not of compassion or hostility, but of a country caught between its values and its fears, its obligations and its limits. Britain is torn between humanitarian identity and a rising demand for order. It is a nation struggling to reconcile who it wants to be with what it feels it has become. The buses may have arrived quietly, but the consequences will not unfold quietly. The families watching from their windows know that. The government knows that. And Britain, fractured, uncertain, restless, knows that too. So the question now hangs heavy over the Highlands, echoing far beyond the barracks walls. If this is the government's solution, what happens when the next wave arrives?
£30 billion. That is the amount Britain is preparing to pay to give up sovereign territory. Today, Chagos representatives have issued an urgent appeal to US President Donald Trump, asking him to block Prime Minister Keir Starmer's plan to transfer the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. A strategically critical British overseas territory, home to the joint US-UK base on Diego Garcia, is suddenly at the centre of a political and security storm. The question landing hardest on Britain is simple and brutal. Why is the UK paying £30 billion to hand over territory it still controls? And why must the President of the United States be asked to intervene? It was never meant to unfold like this. The deal began as a quiet diplomatic process, tucked away inside long-standing international legal disputes. Yet the moment the financial details surfaced, the reaction became immediate and explosive. A nation already strained by unrest, migration pressures, and doubts over national direction has now discovered a territorial decision of staggering scale made without public debate.
Chagos Islanders have made a last-ditch appeal to President Trump to block Sir Keir Starmer's £30 billion Chagos surrender, which will hand the islands, the British overseas territory, to Mauritius.
The turning point came when Chagos Islanders in exile stepped forward with a public plea. Their letter to President Trump describes the transfer as a direct threat to regional stability and warns that Diego Garcia could fall under indirect political influence from actors aligned with Mauritius. And what stunned observers most was their offer to go as far as naming an island after him if he intervened. This is a population that no longer believes Downing Street is listening. Their appeal bypasses the British government entirely and lands on the desk of a US president known for decisive unilateral action. Trump's current foreign policy posture only sharpens the drama. Since returning to office in 2025, he has taken an aggressively assertive stance on global security, from Middle Eastern sanctions to military operations in Latin America. For Chagos leaders, he represents the last person capable of stopping the transfer before it is too late. The symbolism, however, is devastating. British citizens displaced decades ago now feel they must turn to Washington, not Westminster, to defend their future. When the figure attached to the deal leaked, the reaction was immediate disbelief. The sense that Britain is paying tens of billions not to strengthen sovereignty, but to give it away, cut straight into public frustration already building across the country. Police forces struggle with escalating demonstrations. Border control faces persistent pressure. Local authorities warn of basic services stretched thin. Against all of that, a £30 billion payment for a territorial handover feels to many like a government that has lost sense of national priorities. The affairs of Mauritius are less relevant to the public than the simple reality. The Chagosians themselves overwhelmingly want to remain under British rule, and yet the transfer moves ahead as if their voices were merely a footnote. It has deepened a suspicion that has been growing for months, that the government is moving according to international legal logic rather than the strategic needs of Britain.
Behind the political noise sits the cold strategic core of the crisis. Diego Garcia is not just another overseas holding, it is one of the most important military platforms in the Indo-Pacific. American long-range bombers rely on it. Western surveillance of key maritime routes runs through it. In a world shaped by rising Chinese and Russian assertiveness, the base is an anchor point of Western hard power. Transferring sovereignty to Mauritius introduces multiple risks. Mauritius participates in the Pelindaba Treaty, a nuclear-free zone agreement shaped partly by Russian influence. Any change in status could raise legal and operational questions for nuclear-capable aircraft or vessels. And while Mauritius is not an adversary, it is deeply interconnected with a region where China has expanded its diplomatic and economic reach. The slightest shift in alignment could complicate future US or UK military actions. What makes this moment even more precarious is the wider geopolitical climate. Western intelligence agencies have been warning for months that China is accelerating its presence across the Indian Ocean, funding port projects, securing mineral routes, and tightening its grip on strategic islands from Sri Lanka to East Africa. Diego Garcia is the one location in this vast region where Western control is absolute, and that certainty is exactly what Starmer's proposal threatens. If sovereignty becomes diluted or subject to external political pressure, even marginally, Beijing gains an opening it has sought for years. For defense planners in London and Washington, that possibility is not theoretical. It is a live, urgent concern shaping every internal briefing on the Chagos deal. Chagos representatives argue that ceding sovereignty now is not merely symbolic. It alters the balance of power in one of the world's most contested regions, and does so at a moment when Western alliances are already under strain.
Keir Starmer's government enters this crisis already navigating one of the most turbulent domestic environments in recent memory. Anti-immigration demonstrations, counter-protests and security concerns have become near daily features across major cities. Civil rights groups condemn the new policing proposals as overreach. Border enforcement remains a point of public tension, and polls show rising support for nationalist parties, accusing Labour of weakening sovereignty. Into this atmosphere drops the revelation of a £30 billion territorial transfer. It is not simply controversial, it is politically combustible. Critics portray Starmer as a Prime Minister guided more by legal doctrine and international consensus than by British strategic interest. Supporters in government insist the deal is about righting historical wrongs, but that explanation finds little comfort among a public increasingly anxious about national control. For Reform UK, for backbench Conservatives and for rising right-wing groups, the Chagos deal becomes the perfect symbol of what they claim is a Labour government disconnected from the public mood. As the story spreads, demonstrators gather outside Parliament. Some carry Chagos flags, others hold signs demanding a halt to the handover. Many simply chant the same phrase repeated in news broadcasts and online comment sections throughout the day: "Keep Chagos British." The police presence grows, tension builds along the pavements. Officers who have already been stretched across weeks of protest activity now face yet another surge triggered by a single question that cuts across all political lines. Why is Britain paying so much to give away land? The anger is not directed only at the deal itself. It comes from a wider feeling that sovereignty is being traded away piece by piece in decisions made behind closed doors. For many protesters, Chagos is not just a set of islands thousands of miles away, it is the line in the sand. If President Trump intervenes, the entire process could be halted within days. If he does not, the handover could proceed,
transforming not only Britain's geopolitical standing, but the domestic political landscape as well. The stakes are immense. A country already struggling to maintain control of its borders, its streets, and its sense of direction is now confronting something even deeper: the possibility that it no longer fully controls its own territory. And so the question hangs over Westminster tonight with an intensity that cannot be ignored. If Britain is willing to pay £30 billion to give up sovereign territory, what else might it be willing to let go next?
Sweden was once the global blueprint for peace, harmony, and the golden age of the middle class. But that model is currently being dismantled by the sound of 30 explosions a month. Imagine a country where 15-year-old girls, blonde, green girls from traditional backgrounds, are being groomed not just for romance, but to carry out contract killings and transport hand grenades on the morning commute. In 2022, Stockholm's gun deaths were 30 times higher than London's. This isn't just a crime wave, it is a total fragmentation of a society. The question every European citizen is now asking is, how did the model of peace become the bomb capital of the continent?
The most chilling development in the Swedish crisis is the evolution of the recruitment pool. Gangs like Foxtrot, led by international fugitives, have pivoted away from recruiting from their own neighborhoods. Instead, they are targeting green girls, native Swedish teenagers who the police are less likely to profile. These girls are being offered upwards of £13,000 to act as couriers and assassins. They are the unseen soldiers in a war between rival factions like the Kurdish Fox and the Strawberry. This isn't just a local dispute. Intelligence suggests these gangs are now operating as proxies for foreign regimes, targeting embassies and schools. The infiltration has reached the courts themselves, with gang-affiliated individuals reportedly securing jobs within the justice system to sabotage it from the inside.
For decades, the Swedish elite operated on a policy of social welfare as a shield. The belief was that if you gave everyone a hug, a welfare check, and a seat at the table, crime would vanish. Critics call it the lemonade and biscuits approach, a soft-on-crime ideology that treated ice-cold killers as victims of their circumstances. But with 60,000 people now directly linked to organized crime in a country of only 10 million, the math no longer adds up. The generous welfare state, which was meant to integrate, has instead been infiltrated, with millions in state funds reportedly being siphoned off to fuel a 17 billion criminal economy. Sweden is currently undergoing a traumatic sobering up. The new Conservative government is attempting to militarize the police response and lower the age of criminal responsibility to 13, but they are fighting 40 years of entrenched liberal polity. While the political left still argues for hugs over handcuffs, the reality on the ground is drone surveillance over Stockholm and police officers being gunned down in routine checks. This is the suicide cult of multiculturalism gone wrong, where the state's desire to appear virtuous has left its own children vulnerable to predatory gangs. The Swedish experiment is at a crossroads. For 30 years, anyone who sounded the alarm was silenced as a dissident or a xenophobe. Today, the facts are doing the talking. As the ice age of crime settles over Scandinavia, the rest of the world is watching closely, because what is happening in the streets of Stockholm today is a warning for every liberal democracy. A society that cannot protect its own borders or its own children will eventually lose its soul. The model of peace is gone. The era of the draconian measure has begun.